one of the many reasons why I love having a podcast is because I get to learn things. And I learned quite a bit from today's guest, Cara Spencer. This is the Backstage Creative, the podcast that focuses on the people who work behind the scenes of theater. My name is Krista Copper. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to this. During the coronavirus pandemic, there are so many people coming out with podcasts, so many people creating albums, putting out content with all of this time that we all now have. And I'm so grateful that this is something that you're taking the time to listen to, whether you're listening to it while you're cleaning or running or walking, or it's the background noise while you're working on something else. I'm grateful that you're listening to this. I love podcasts. I listen to quite a few of them. I'm involved with others that are not my own. It's such a good medium. I like it. It's simple. It is what it is, and and there's many ways to do podcasts and to take advantage of this medium. I think it's great, and I hope you do too. Like I said, today is my conversation with Cara Spencer. Cara works in the Kansas City area, which is also where I live. It was fun talking to her. As we got talking, we discovered that we've worked on the same shows before in the past. We both spent several years in Wichita, Kansas. Yeah, we worked on the same shows there, even though we didn't know each other at the time. So it is fun to talk to someone who works in theater in the area that I live in. That's one of my goals for this show, is to interview people who work all over the country, all over the world in theater. It's very easy to find people who work in New York City. I just want to celebrate the art that's happening in other areas. I try really hard to have as diverse group of guests as possible. But one of the few frustrating things about having a podcast is I can't control who gets back to me. So if there's ever a time when it just seems like there's, a whole string of white women in their 20s, or a whole batch of stage managers right after another, that's not because those are the only people I'm reaching out to. That's because those are the only people that are getting back to me. So I try so hard. I have a spreadsheet where I keep track of the people that I've interviewed, and what jobs they do, and where they're from, so that I can try to bring to you, the listener, a diverse set of voices as possible. Just please know that I want to use the Backstage Creative as a platform to highlight the many different people that it takes, the many different ages and genders and races and cultural backgrounds and geographic locations and skill sets that it takes to create theater. I think that's so important. And when people who work in theater all look the same, the art suffers because of it. So please know that I'm trying. I'm trying to find people who look different from me, and people who maybe look different than most of the people who are working on Broadway. But I can only do so much. It also takes those people being willing to give up some of their time to sit down and talk to me. So let's get to the interview. Here's my conversation with Cara Spencer. So what have you been up to the past, like, has it 10 months, 9 months
Oh my
since
gosh,
the pandemic started?
it has. My 9-month anniversary since I got sent home from work was a week ago today, actually, looking at the date. So I've been up to a lot of odds and ends. I kind of have fallen back into the freelance world that I was living in right after undergrad. So years and years and years ago. I've been doing some substitute teaching. I have found a few murals to paint, so I've done that a little bit. I have been, oh my gosh, trying to like stay busy, just volunteering and helping people and doing what I can. I went and kind of drove around the country for a while and sort of like hopped from quarantine to quarantine with friends who were like having babies or recently had babies. So it was like, I'm not really quarantined, but I was just quarantined with a baby. So now I'm quarantined with a different baby. So I think this is still legit. So it's been an interesting 9 months.
Yeah, I was a substitute teacher for 2 years, several years ago. That can be a difficult job.
Yeah, it was weird. And I was a long-term sub for a music and theater teacher actually in a small town in Kansas. So I was like getting to do theater and music and stuff that I love, but it was also like I taught high school for a couple of years, like way back in the day. It was kind of interesting to be sort of back in that world all of a sudden, to find myself like doing lesson plans and all of that stuff, because they were just like, it's your classroom for the next 12 weeks, have at it. Don't kill any of the children, like basically
Yeah.
was like where I found myself. So it was interesting. I was actually quarantined the first week of class. I was living with my parents and my dad ended up with COVID, so then I had to quarantine, and so I wasn't there. So I was like teaching online a group of students who had never met me, and I don't know any of them because I've never met them, and they haven't been in school. They're in a classroom for the first time in 7 months, and it was just a very bizarre experience. And so then, like, when I actually got to the classroom a week and a half later, it was like starting over again. It was an interesting experience, but it was fun. We learned how to juggle lots of, normal high school theater class stuff. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, cool. So I would love to hear about your background, where you're from originally, where you went to school, and yeah, how you got to where you are today.
Okay, so I grew up in small towns in Kansas. My dad was a teacher and then a principal and then a superintendent. So we kind of small town hopped as he got those different jobs. I graduated from Linden High School with about 54 people. I went to Sterling College, which is a small liberal arts school, Christian liberal arts school out in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. Hutch is the nearest quote unquote city. So I was initially undecided between music and theater and thought I would be an actress, as all 18-year-olds think. And sort of just fell into painting actually. I had painted a mural with my art teacher in my high school, my senior year of high school. So then when I got to college, I got a job in the scene shop. My work study job was building scenery. And we got everything built for Fiddler on the Roof, and nobody else wanted to paint it. They were like, paint is gross and smelly and messy, and I hate it, and I don't want to do this. And I was like, I love paint. I can totally do this. So for the next 3 years, I made lots of messes and lots of mistakes and just kind of taught myself how to paint. I very quickly fell in love with it. I met my first mentor, a lady named Rachel. She actually went to Sterling about 10 years before I did. She came back and painted a show with me once my advisor realized that I was serious about really wanting to do this. He brought her back to teach me what she could in the span of a show. So I got to do some really cool stuff there. And then after graduating, I did my student teaching in Andover, and I sort of settled there in Wichita for a while. I worked at Music Theater Wichita I was there for 4 summers. I freelanced around in the Wichita area, painted at most of the theaters. The Crown was still doing pretty big shows at that point. The Forum was doing shows, children's theater, and then other random, like some high schools around town. And then I randomly got a phone call one day that said, "Hey, this is the principal out at Liberal High School. I hear you have a teaching certificate. We have a job." Basically was like, we our teacher bailed. School starts in 2 weeks. We need a teacher. Are you interested? And I said, "Nope." And they said, pretty please. We really like we don't have anyone. And I was like, I mean, I really don't want to, but I guess like I have kind of done everything there is to do in Wichita. I don't really know what the next step is anyway. So sure, I can do anything for 9 months. I'll try it. So I ended up out in Liberal. I was there for 2 years and taught for a couple of years, and then it was fun. I loved the students, but and I love teaching, but high school is not really the right atmosphere for my personality. I decided to go to grad school, so I went out to North Carolina to School of the Arts and did grad school and worked at a couple other summer stocks while I was out there. And then after graduation, went down to Houston and worked at the Alley for a year. And then that's when the job at the rep, the charge job here at the rep opened up. And so I applied and moved back to Kansas City. I had had my eye on this job for a very long time. The family being in Kansas and I like the size of Kansas City. It's sort of the size of a city that I wanted to end up in someday. And I get to teach a scene painting class and hopefully someday a couple more classes at UMKC. The best of all the worlds. I get to run a shop and it's not so big that I don't get to do any painting myself. And then I'm also getting to teach. So it's really sort of all my dreams come true in the perfect size city, conveniently located, not far from my very adorable nephew. So, and yeah, here I am today.
I love that. So I went to Wichita State,
Oh,
and I've
cool.
worked at many of the theaters that you listed.
Nice.
So what do you like? What about painting like grabbed you?
I honestly don't know. It's sort of like I said, I got to paint a couple of murals when I was a senior in high school. We painted like a tiger head on the press box, the football field kind of thing, and then painted a mural next to the front door, like on the big wall that like leads up to the front door of the high school sort of thing that my art teacher designed. And it was just something I just fell in love with painting something that was really big and sort of also being given another picture and sort of the challenge of like, hey, make this happen. So it was more of a like tangible, like, ooh, a goal, oh, something to achieve, okay, how do I make this a reality? And it was just something about that was the first time that because I'd taken art classes and stuff in the past, and I'm not a designer. I can design, but I don't love to do it. And so like getting to use somebody else's idea and just paint it, there's something about that that I love. And so then the more that I got to work in theater, and once I got out of high school and was doing more of your like general what you think of with theater, with all of the collaboration and the working with the other people and bringing a designer's vision to life so that way the director can, use it to build this world that the actors then get to fill, and then the lighting person comes in and you're working with the carpenters, and it's just sort of I love how I fit into this great big elaborate like wheel of people with completely different skill sets and temperaments and personalities and talents, and yet somehow all of it manages to work together. And so I think that it's almost more so that collaboration and being part of that dysfunctional family that every theater company is to some extent. I almost love that more than the painting almost at times. So it's sort of I do love to paint. I love to make scenery. I love to say, "Oh yes, I can make this piece of plywood look like concrete or steel or aluminum or a spaceship or whatever the heck it needs to look like." So it's sort of that challenge, but also then getting to do something that other people will then get to use and sort of giving something to them. I think that's my favorite part of it is the getting to, it's not so much like me doing art for me, it's me being able to do something for other people. And I think that's very fulfilling.
I like that. One I heard someone told me a long time ago that art is a service, and at the time I was young and I
Mhm.
was like, the art is not a service, like it's all about me and what I want to do, but the
Yeah.
older I get, the more I realize like, yeah, art is a service.
Yeah. Totally. I like that.
Take us through like pre-COVID, back when things were normal. What does your process look like when you're working on a show?
It sort of depends. At the rep, I work as the charge artist, and it's just kind of I'll just throw this in because a lot of people don't know the difference. Like, even most people in theater don't really know the difference. A charge artist is the person who runs the shop, sort of like a project manager is a word that a lot of people understand. The charge gets the drawings from the designer. They do all the communicating with the designer, all the purchasing, all of the coming up with the process. Okay, the carpenters are building this out of this material. What do I need to do to make it look like the designer's picture? And then you come up with samples and you talk to the designer and they say yes and no, and then all the budgeting and ordering and all of that jazz is falls into that. And then a scenic artist, they then work for or with the charge to bring all of that to life. They're the ones who, like a scenic artist, generally just shows up and then gets to paint all day long, which is amazing and wonderful and super fun sometimes. A lot of my really good friends are incredible scenic artists, and most of them are better painters than me, honestly. But I just love the charging aspect. I love getting to talk with other departments and problem solve and talk to the interact, see people, lots of different people throughout the day, and talk to the designers and develop those relationships and everything. So to actually answer your question, it starts with either an email or preferably a package in the mail from the designer that says, here are all of my sketches or my finished elevations. This is what you're painting. Go talk to the tech director. And so then at that point, I take all of the drawings that I've been giving the designers, drawings and draftings and elevations and everything, and I look at it. I'm like, okay, you do all the problem solving of how big is this, how much paint am I going to need, all of that. And then you talk to the tech director. You say, what are you building all of this out of? And then you usually have a couple of conversations about like, ooh, can you not build it out of that? Because I really don't want to have to paint that sort of material. Or, oh, I think it would look way better if we did it this way. And so you have all of those conversations and discussions and come to some sort of compromise where hopefully both of you are at least halfway happy. Then you just start painting. And one thing I love about working at the rep is in some places the shop is just so big, and the amount of theater and like the amount of scenery that's being produced is so huge that the charge doesn't get to do a whole lot of painting. They are much more in a managing, like, okay, I have 7 scenic artists, they're all painting for me. That's 7 people to keep track of what projects they're working on, when they're going to get finished, what they're going to do next, when the carpenters need stuff back. It's just a lot of moving pieces, so you don't always get to paint a whole lot, which is, it can be really fun. Like I got to do one show and I was charging, at one point I looked around my deck and I had 3 drops on the ground plus hard scenery, and I had like over 24 people painting for me. It was really cool, but I didn't get to touch a paintbrush in 3.5 days. I was just like, I don't, I miss painting. Um, and so at the rep, I had a one full-time painter in my shop, and then we had some overhire if we needed extra help. And so I did get to do a lot more painting too. So I would like run to a meeting or go send an email, and then I would get to go paint for an hour or two before I got interrupted by something else and had to, take care of a problem or put out a fire or answer a question. Then you just kind of frantically paint. You get everything done as fast as you can, but it's not just about being like really, really fast. It's more about being very efficient. And okay, how can I save 30 seconds? Because if you can save 30 seconds 20 times throughout the day, that starts to add up, especially over the span of a week. If you can save 10 to 15 minutes a day, that adds up very quickly to an hour or more without trying very hard. So things like keep your paint right next to you, and paint with a bamboo rather than like crawling around on the ground on your hands and knees, and just how can I most efficiently get this scenery finished so it can go away and the new pieces can come in. And if it needs to go to electrics because it's a light box that needs lights put in it, or if it has to go back to the carpenters because they have to do more to it, or if it has to be the first piece that gets loaded in, it's keeping track of all of that. Like, this has to get done before that because this, and this has to go to this person because of that. And so it's just sort of that fun sort of Tetris game of keeping everything straight. And then hopefully, if everything goes right, it's all finished and painted and beautiful, and it can get loaded in. And then you have a couple little touch ups and notes once the designer shows up. And then you can open the show and sit there in a cute dress and have a glass of wine and criticize your work while actors do their thing on the stage. So
Nice. About how long do you have from the time that you get the design to like tech week?
it really varies from show to show. Like when I was working in Wichita at music theater, we would build a couple of summers. We built 3 shows in and put up 2 more. So we basically did 5 shows in 2.5 months. So at that point, we were doing basically building a show every 2 to 3 weeks. We would have a new show put up. A full size backdrop, if it's a landscape, a good scenic should be able to, with like maybe one person helping, you should be able to paint a full stage, like 60-foot landscape drop in 2, maybe 2.5 days. Just because there is usually a time crunch. I would say at the rep, kind of our average is we have about a month to build a show, so, which is great. It's a lot to get done, but it's also very reasonable. And since we do have kind of smaller shops, it's like, and us like physically and like numbers of humans working in the shops, it keeps it very manageable. So we're really good about keeping a healthy work life balance. So I don't have to spend like 1 million hours a week at the shop trying to get everything finished. It's much more reasonable, like 40 to 60 hours a week. We'll get a show built in a month without too much trouble. So
That's great. Like very rarely in the theater world do you hear like, "Oh, that's we have a reasonable amount of time to get it done."
yeah, yeah. And so, and that is one big thing. Like, that's one of the things that's biggest for me personally, especially as a charge, is because I've done the crazy summer stock. At this point, I'm too old to do summer stock. I realized that the last year I did it because, it's full of kids who are like 18 to 24 years old, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. Let's stay up and paint all night. Let's never sleep. Let's only work and drink. And that's it. And mostly work. And I'm just like, it's not healthy. You're going to get burnt out. Like I've learned that I personally, and I think everyone is like this, it's just kind of getting to the point where everyone realizes this at their own time. I know that I can accomplish more in 5 to 6 days of work when I'm working 8 to 10 hours a day than I can in 7, 10 to 12 hours a day. Like, you get that to that point where you're just tired and you start to make silly mistakes and you slow down and your work gets sloppy. So you have to go back and redo it. And so it's just like realizing, and it is like, it's a very weird thing in theater, and it has been a tough conversation to have a couple of times with people when I've been like, no, my crew is going home because my crew is tired, and I know that we have enough time to get this done for load in, but we are not going to stay and do it tonight. And it is hard to say that, to tell that to some people, just because we do have that, theater does have that just sort of like oh, we have so much to do, and like we don't have enough time, and go 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 and work 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 kind of atmosphere that tends to permeate our world. And I think that happens outside of theater too.
How do you keep track of all of the pieces? Are you using like spreadsheets? Do you have like a legal pad? Like how do you keep track of everything?
Oh my gosh. So don't tell anyone. I am like as computer illiterate as like probably worse than most grandparents at this point. I'm so bad at computers. So I tried once to do a spreadsheet, and bless my heart, it was the most sad little moment. I gave up on the spreadsheet. So then I opened like a Word doc and just tried to make like a table and do it that, and I so quickly realized that it was the dumbest thing I had ever done. And I was like, okay, so I'm a very tactile person, which makes sense because I'm a painter. I want to be able to touch things, and I can't touch computers the way that I want to. So I am super old school, and I have like the notebook. I've got like a small notebook that I usually kind of is also doubles as like my to-do list, calendar, notebook, things that have to get accomplished this week list. And then I have another, like, I'll usually write on the backs of, I'll make copies of elevations, and I'll write the process out either on the backs of those sheets or on a legal pad that just lives in the paint shop where people can find it. So if I were to die, they would be able to like find this piece of paper and read my chicken scratch and be like, oh, this is how this needs to get painted. Excellent. And so I do try to write out the process for everything, and then like keep it there. So if there are questions and I'm not around, people can hopefully find answers. I'm definitely one of those people. When I was teaching, I was nominated for like teacher with the messiest desk award. And there was one day, one of my students, this sweet little child that she knew that I was tired and stressed out, and was like, it was in the middle of a show. And so she cleaned my desk for me one day while I wasn't in my room. And I came back, and it was the closest thing to a panic attack that I think I've ever had outside of the dentist office. And I didn't know where anything was, because I am very much one of those like very organized chaos. I can remember where things are. If I touched it and put it there and saw it with my eyeballs, I'm going to remember exactly where it was. And that sort of scenery works. I can do that with scenery too. Like, I remember, like, I touched this wall. I know what this wall is. This paint color, that paint color, these brushes, this roller. And just that's the way that my brain works, is very dimensional and physical. And so that's a handy thing for my job.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
um, how do you grow? Like, how do you get better at what you do?
Oh my gosh, so many ways. I don't like to do something the same way twice necessarily. When I'm like, if somebody's like, "Hey, we want a brick wall," I want to do that brick wall differently every single time, because there's literally countless ways to make a fake brick wall, and I don't know what the best way is yet because I haven't tried them all. And so sort of always that pushing, like, okay, and then at the end, like, you assess and you're like, okay, so with the paper mache, this worked really well, but with the texture goop that I made out of plaster, that worked really well. Like, how can I take the best of all of those worlds and put them together into my next world? So it's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of, like I said earlier, like just sort of thinking, like, how can I save 30 seconds? Like, how can I get better at this? And then a lot of repetition. It's painting is so much muscle memory and so much just in general practicing, like that thing where somebody says you have to do something for 10,000 hours or whatever it is before you can do it well. And so it's that just sort of the repetition. And I had a professor who I think put it really well. She's like, every time you do something new or learn something new, you're adding tools to your toolbox. And eventually, like, yeah, you may have like all of the tools in your toolbox, but you're going to keep using all of them, but you can use them differently and apply them to different situations. So you think, like, okay, this is how I draw, perspective staircase on a piece of paper on my table. How do I take that and do it big? What is the best way to do this? What is the best way to lay this out? Okay, my shop is not big enough. How can I can't reach my vanishing point. It's 70 feet away and my shop is 50 feet big. How do I solve this problem? So it's a lot of that, like that changing lessons you've learned in the past and applying them to a new situation. Like, I know that this doesn't work, so I'll never do that again. And that's another one, like either, failing and then fail better, or say, okay, I'm never going to do that again because that was the biggest, dumbest mistake of my life. And you have to own it. And you have to just, you're going to screw it up. It's going to happen. You're going to make epically gigantic, horrible mistakes. Everyone does. That's fine. It's supposed to happen. The important thing is that you then learn from that giant, epic, terrible, disastrous mistake and you don't do that mistake again. And you learn from it and you grow as an artist and as a person. And so I think that's it. Just a lot of practice and a lot of trial and error and a lot of trying to remember, like, this works, this doesn't, along with all of your other things. Like, you want to be a better drawer, draw every day. But again, that just sort of boils down to the practice, practice, practice. And don't be afraid to admit, I'm really weak in this area. I should get better. And then focus on getting better in that area where you know you need practice.
Hmm. Do you have any like physical resources that you use, whether books or if there's like a blog, someone's blog or someone's Instagram page that you go to for inspiration or to grow?
I would say yes and no. Like, I have a bunch of friends obviously who are scenic artists, and so stalking on their Instagrams or just scrolling through my Instagram where I follow all of them, it's always amazing to see what they're doing. And you can then remember things like, oh my gosh, this one time I remember that she did this super awesome looking concrete. I have to paint concrete. I should shoot her a text and be like, hey, what was your process for that? How did you do that? Was there any real texture or was it all paint? And then just in general, like, knowing your friends. Like, I have a friend, Chrissy, and she is the tightest, cleanest, neatest painter you will ever meet. She's one of those people who would like paint something and you would think it was real. Like, she could paint a wall, like Wile E. Coyote, like a tunnel that he would then run into. Chrissy could do that, but with literally any piece of architecture your heart can imagine. She's just so good and so tight. And she's painted a lot of drops. She's painted more drops than I have. She's painted scrims. I know that she's a great person to call when I have a question about a drop or when I have a question about architecture and how it's supposed to look and how it's supposed to work. So she's a great person. I love that I can, like, I hate my smartphone half the time, but when I can take a picture of something and send it to somebody and say, "What's wrong with this? Why am I stupid?" and they can respond because they can see it right there in a picture in their hand. I love that part about smartphones. So then, yeah, I know people. I have a friend who does a lot of, she works in a big shop in New York, so she does lots of installations. And so she's great for when I'm like, hey, I need the best sealer in the world. What can I use here that no one will ever be able to ruin? It can get dumped with 7,000 gallons of water every single day, and then they tap dance on it with an orca whale. Like, what will keep this treatment safe? And I can text her and she'll know. She'll have an answer for me right away. So it's sort of I guess networking is the fancy word for it, but just kind of knowing your friends and knowing your friends and your colleagues' strengths and knowing who to call when you have a specific question is, I think, even more helpful than just scrolling through Instagram and stealing great ideas, although that's always really fun to do too.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Do you ever, are you ever faced with a set piece or a project that you just are just stuck? Besides what you mentioned, like going, asking friends, is there anything else that you do when you're just stuck in the creative process?
Oh my gosh. Yes. You yell at the scenery. I do, at least. Occasionally throw things at it. I also really like to give myself pep talks. They sound a little bit like, "Oh my gosh, Kara, you're such a moron. Why can you not fix this? Okay, maybe I should just like go home." And so you do. You leave because if you're just staring at something for too long, like it won't work. And you can call, and that's what I love about in theater. Like, yeah, we can be standing there and saying, okay, how do we get this, those like that brown paper that protects the plexiglass when you buy it and you bring it home so it doesn't get all scratched up before it gets home. If you leave that paper on the plexiglass for say 15 to 20 years, it doesn't come off real easily. Sometimes somebody says, get rid of this brown paper on this 20-year-old plexiglass. And you're like, I don't know. And so you just call everyone you can think of, and you call the electrics department and you're like, hey, are y'all doing anything? We're trying to get paper off of plexiglass. We're standing around with knives right now. So come join the party. And if you have any better ideas or worse ideas, or just ideas, let's try them. And so you stand around, and eventually, with 15 people working on the same piece of scenery, or staring at the same problem, you'll come up with a solution. I love bringing in somebody super random who has no idea, because they don't come in with any preconceived notions like, oh yeah, we have to make this happen, and in order to make this happen, probably this has to happen, and definitely that, and if not that, then this, and well, that person said that. If a set of new eyes is invaluable. Like, it's happened so many times. Somebody walks up, and like once in a while you get to be the lucky person who walks up and you're like, "What about this?" And everyone looks at you and they're like, "What? Oh, yes." But most of the time you get to be the person who's saying, "Oh, yes. Why didn't I think of that? It's so obvious." So, so yeah, going home and sleeping, or just standing around and trying 100 different things, and eventually something will, like, even if it doesn't work, it will be the best at not working. So the least terrible. If you can't get the best, you can at least find something that's the least terrible. And then you just roll with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, one of the many great things about theater is that shows close. No show stays open forever. So
True.
sometimes it just has to be, well, this show's going to close in a month and it'll be fine.
Yes, and it's called a play. Like, I think that that is, people forget that. It's called a play. We are playing. We are creating a world for people to play dress up and act like other people. I don't say that lightly to like diminish anything that we do, because I think everyone I work, well, not everyone, but most of the people who are in theater are just so incredible and passionate and talented and so good at what they do. And so I by no means like mean to belittle them, or like our industry or anything, but it's supposed to be fun. It is a play. I think it's so important to remember that, and like that childlike wonder, like the audience is going to be amazed when the kite flies across the stage in Mary Poppins. Whether you use fishing string or whether you tie it to a batten or whether you just like throw the thing and you get lucky and it goes exactly where you need it to. Like it will work. That childlike wonder that theater can bring out in everyone, including boring grown-ups. It's just so important when you're creating the piece too, because yeah, if you lose that magic and that imagination and that wonder, there's no reason for it. So, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Definitely. How do you take care of yourself? And you can go any direction you want with this, either like physically or emotionally, because it gets stressful, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes we're dealing with big personalities. So how do you just take care of yourself so that you can do what you need to do?
Oh yeah, totally agree with that. And I'm sure that like people who have worked with me will attest. I am also one of those big personalities, so yes, it's a thing. So I run. I was a runner in high school. That's kind of one thing that as long as the weather's not really, really gross, I will run. I will get home from work. I will take my dog and we will go out. We usually go to the same trail because it's easy to get there. And we will run not like insane amounts of miles or anything, but a couple of miles. And if it's been a really terrible, bad day and I'm annoyed and angry at everyone, I run those 2 miles very ridiculously quickly. If it's been a good day and I'm just like, happy and chill and it's a gorgeous day full of perfect sunny wonderful weather, that yeah, I will probably run slower and stop and walk or throw rocks into the river or whatever. Being outside in general, I love being in nature. I love just everything that has been created in this world, seeing just creation and nature and the earth. I spend so much time kind of replicating it when I'm at work. It's nice to be around the real thing. It feels very, very solid and very real. So that's definitely big. I love everyone I work with, and I am very blessed that I get to, like, I can call vast majority of the people that I work with, if not everyone, a friend. But also having friends outside of work is something that I started realizing and learning in school. And when I was an undergrad, it was great because my roommate was an athlete who was a business major, and so we never saw each other except for when we were in our room, and we came from such different worlds and different. We got along great, and it was amazing, and it was wonderful for both of us because we sort of, when we were being friends and when we were with our friends and with our roommates, we were away from everything else, and it was a nice break. And it's like a nice, just people who kind of help keep things in perspective. I go to church. That's huge for me. Sundays are just very weird if I'm not going to church and if I don't have that group of people. That's just kind of where I tend to find friends. I find a cool church somewhere in whatever city I've landed in that does a lot of outreach. And I like to go, paint murals and build soccer fields for kids at apartment complexes who, are currently playing soccer in like forests or something. And just like getting out and doing things for people and just staying involved and having as full and as active in a life outside of the work world as you can, just to kind of help. I think a lot of artists tend to base their self worth and their value on the art that they are creating, which I totally get. I have done this so many times too, and that's one of the things that's been so hard for me during COVID is I feel like I haven't contributed anything to anyone. I haven't painted scenery
Mm.
for a designer. I haven't given actors a world to work in. I haven't got to yell at carpenters recently. I just haven't done anything with any of my skills. It's so easy to just fall into that. Like, if I'm not doing all of these perfect, amazing, brilliant, beautiful things at work, if you keep all of your value tied up in what you are doing at work, it's just so easy to fall into that pit of like, seeing yourself as just that. And so making sure that you do things that you care about and value, and you get involved in things that are not at all related to work, just to kind of remind you. It's a very physical present reminder, like, oh my goodness, there's so much more to me and so much more to life and so much more to this world than theater and work and art. Like, there's a whole world out there, and I'm just a tiny little piece of it, which I guess could sound scary, but to me it's comforting to know that like what I do or don't accomplish at work one day is so minuscule in the grand scheme of things. Like it's not going to make or break the universe.
Yeah, so I'm also a runner, and I think, yeah, I just, I think the other aspects of your life that you pursue can so benefit the art that you make, and not that
Oh,
you necessarily need to do that, just to get better at music or art or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
But
yeah, for sure.
I mean, lessons I learned from running have made me a better musician. Like, I'm a better musician because I run, and
Oh,
so and vice
definitely.
versa, I'm a better runner because I'm a musician. So
Yep. Yeah, same with painting. Yep, I've noticed like my arms not as strong as they are when I'm lugging around 8 to 54 gallons of paint a day, all day, every day. So like don't run as well. Where when I'm not running, I'm cranky and tired and annoyed and stiff and not fun at work. So no, I totally agree.
mhm. Yeah. So I've interviewed maybe like two or three other scenic charges, like painters,
Hmm.
people in that vein. Are there any misunderstandings about your job, either when you're like talking to non theater people or even in the theater world?
Oh my gosh. Yes. I think in the theater world, the biggest one is definitely kind of like I said, like just kind of the difference between like, and this is like such a practical, boring answer, but the difference between a charge and a scenic artist, I think, is one sort of just understanding the timeline and understanding like what does take a long time to paint and what only takes a few minutes. Because it's a process that other people don't do, it's way more time consuming to paint a brick wall than it is to paint a backdrop sometimes. And so I think that that's probably the biggest one within the theater world, is just kind of understanding the process and the timeline of different elements of what it takes to paint them. People who are outside the theater world don't know that my job exists. They just stare at me like I am an alien, obviously. When I tell them what I do, I generally don't even go with charge artist. I just say I'm a painter, I do murals and I paint for theater. And if they want to know, they'll be like, "You paint for theater?" And then you explain, "Well, like in a show, you can't go to Walmart and buy everything that's on the stage." So just in general, explaining my job exists is the biggest one for people outside the theater world. It is interesting. Like I got to paint some really cool wallpaper for a show we did last season. And it was like this super cool, it was like a 6 or 7 part stencil and all these colors and super awesome and fun and intricate. And my brothers and my sister-in-law stopped by work one day when I was working on it, and they all know what I do and they've seen my portfolio and they know, like in theory they know what I do. But they were just like, even they who, like I said, they know what I do and they've seen pictures. They're like, this is, I had no, what you should like make a Netflix show of like how you do this, because I would not, he was like, I knew you painted it, but I wouldn't have ever thought, oh, that's how you do that or anything like that. So it's just one of those worlds that if you're not in it, you don't necessarily realize it's a thing. So
Yeah, yeah. Like, at least as a musician, like, people have some sort of grasp over
yeah,
what I do. But yeah, your world's a little more mysterious.
it really is, which I kind of love. So
Hmm.
it's fun to be the mysterious, like paint covered person. And then you can like get all like fancied up and like show up at an opening night. Nobody recognizes you because you're not covered in paint wearing a bandana. So
So this might be an impossible question. If you had to pick three skills that you use the most in your job, what would they be?
communication, communication, probably communication. And then after that would be, unfortunately, geometry. And after that would be knowing which brush to use. And then there is a little bit of painting involved. Communication is obviously the biggest one, whether it's with the designer or the tech director or the production manager or your painters if you're the charge, or with your charge if you're the painter. Uh, it's so, so, so stinking important. And then after that would be just kind of learning what tool and what brush is best for any given situation, and then using that tool and knowing how to use it. And then drawing, you have to have a good drawing, and so much of drawing comes from being able to draw a square that is square. So Pythagoras' little theorem gets used so much more than I will ever admit to my geometry teacher that I use it, because I nearly failed geometry. So I cannot admit that that is how I make my living at this point. So yeah, so math and drawing and communication and a little bit of painting.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought of math, but yeah, it makes sense when you said it.
Yeah, it's not one that you ever think of, and it is funny, like I how much math I have now realized I can do, because like I said, I'm a very, if I can like touch it and like literally do the math, I can do it. But when I was in math class, just like staring at numbers and letters in a book, I was like, I will never understand any of this. I can't do it. I quit.
Awesome. So I have like one question I like to ask other people, but before that, do you have like a website, or how can people find you?
Yeah, my website is caraspencerpaint.com, and my Instagram is Cara Spencer Paint. And those are the two easiest, best ways to find me. There's also a Facebook page, but Facebook is confusing because they're now like mixed with Instagram, and I miss notifications from that. So Instagram, Cara Spencer Paint. My website, caraspencerpaint.com. My email, caraspencerpaint@gmail. As a last resort, you can find me on Facebook, Cara Spencer Paint. So
I like that. Everything nice and tidy. Everything the same.
trying, yeah, it took a while, but I did finally eventually get all the names to be more or less the same. So yeah.
Great. So the last question I like to ask everyone is, what advice would you give to young people who want to do what you do? So advice to young people who want to make a living painting sets for theater.
Oh my gosh, just do it. It's so fun. Just start painting everything that you can. Find a house painter and work for them for a summer. You'll get so fast. You will learn to paint a wall so quickly, which is an invaluable skill. Convince your mom that you need to repaint your bathroom. There's so much cutting in when you paint a bathroom around all of those stupid cabinets, and around the sink, and around the toilet, and around, if you paint the walls different colors, you have to cut in the corners of the walls. Paint the things. Go buy spray paint and find a train car or a bridge or a shed or something, preferably not one that will get you arrested for being painted. But paint it. If you are still in high school and you have a chance to, like, if your school lets you do, like, go to a tech school or something like that, go take an automotive painting class. Like, enroll in automotive painting. Do it. You'll learn so much. Don't ever turn down any form of painting just because you're like, I want to be a theater painter, so I can't paint houses. Shut up. You're not too good to paint houses. Go paint the dang house. You will learn so much. Don't be scared to apply for things. It doesn't matter if you're qualified for them or not. Apply. Every once in a while, you'll be surprised and you'll get a job, and you may find yourself in way over your head, but don't be scared, because literally everyone who works in theater has found themselves in a job when they were in so far over their head they didn't know what to do, and you just keep swimming. Eventually, you find Nemo and it all works out. Don't be scared to make mistakes, and don't be intimidated by the people who you meet. Like, you can't walk into a new shop and just like look around at all the old people who look like they've been there for forever and they're like mean and scary or whatever. Oh my gosh, they were once just as young as you were, and they have done every dumb thing, and they're still doing dumb mistakes. You can learn a lot from them. Don't walk in thinking that you know more than they do, because they have made more mistakes than you have. And so they've learned a lot more than you've had a chance to learn. But at the same time, just don't be scared. Just go do it. Go paint the things. Go learn the things. Go make the mistakes, and then get better.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Carly Wagner.